Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar about lactate testing, to put it in a nice way. Thanks for joining. Very exciting to see so many people signing up for today's session on how to improve your lactate testing. While we have more people dropping in, let me give you some housekeeping items, so to speak, okay? So the webinar is scheduled to be approximately 1 hour, which is going to be 45 to 50 minutes-ish for the presentation. And then we have time for Q&A, hopefully afterwards. This webinar is recorded, and the recording will be made available to you guys afterwards for a couple of days. So it's not going to be an evergreen, which we can save forever. But if you want to review a few things, you can do so afterwards. Furthermore, we have a handout from this webinar, not in terms of the slides, but in terms of some scientific references and other information that you might find useful from this webinar. You're going to receive this after this webinar via email, okay? So there's nothing you need to do. You left your email address with us when you registered, and so we will use this email address to send you the references and information that I'm going to highlight during this webinar. So that said, I think we are almost ready to start. I see a few more people dropping in here, which is great. So again, about 45 minutes presentation, maybe 50 minutes, and then it should be time for Q&A. Thanks, Eduardo, for the feedback. Anybody else can give me, before I start here, can anybody else give me some feedback? How are we doing sound-wise? Eduardo is complaining or giving me an update that maybe the sound is not so great. It's okay. Okay, awesome. Oh, okay. Look, that's awesome feedback. Eduardo, sorry, it seems to be maybe on your end. Okay, super sound. Great, thank you. Okay, that is a lot of feedback and also a good test that the chat box here is working. Okay, cool. So again, then I think I would like to start because it's 3 minutes after, and yeah, whoever is dropping in now, I think it's going to be fine. So with that, I also, I'm sure you can see my screen. If anybody cannot see my screen, then let me know. So let's start today's session on how to unfuck your lactate testing. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the agenda again, so to speak, a reminder of what you have already seen on the landing page. So we are going to talk about blind spots and lactate testing. We're going to talk about body composition specifically and the error of the measurement device. And then we are going to spend, I would argue, the better time of the presentation of the webinar today on talking about testing protocols, which evaluation method you can use for different testing protocols, and the pitfalls of that. And then I'm going to, with that, which is pretty much linked, going to shift the focus a little bit more towards what we really can tell from a shift in lactate curve. So when the lactate curve of an incremental test goes, so to speak, left or right in a test-retest scenario, and then going to disclose and also along the way going to talk a little bit more about what is also possible with lactate, because hands down the typical incremental test, so to speak, is based on science that is pretty much almost 50 years old by now, 49. So okay, so let's get straight into that. I'm going to start easy with a few easier things, which is not making the huge differences maybe, but for some, depending on what level of performance you're working in, it might, and that is body composition and error. So Why body composition? That is a funny one, I would argue, because body composition is really overlooked, at least in my opinion, in lactate testing. What do I mean with that? Um, very likely, if you do lactate testing, you will also handle other metrics, for example, relative power in watts per kilogram. So, which means you take a power output and you basically divide it by the body weight of an athlete. And you do the same mathematical operation when you have a VO2 measurement. So VO2 max divided by body weight. And you can do that because you can easily measure the body weight. The ironic thing with lactate concentration is that we are doing the same mathematical operation, which basically means we divide one measurement by another measurement. In terms of lactate, it's millimoles per liter. However, most people, no offense, normally don't ask for the liters. So nobody knows, or asking the question, hey, wait a second, if you have 2 millimoles, 3, 4, 5 millimoles per liter, how many liters are there? And that is something I would like to address here very quick. So lactate dilutes in water. So lactate is produced obviously in the working muscle in exercise, what we are talking about here. Okay, so it dilutes in the exercise muscle depending, on the makeup of the muscle. It's approximately 80% made out of water, so it dilutes already there. But then lactate dilutes also in other liquids or other compartment of the body, right? In sweat, you might be aware of that. In interstitial fluid, in blood, obviously, this is where most of us measure it likely. So lactate dilutes in that parts of the body where you can find water. And that means, obviously, the more water you have, the more space there is for the lactate to dilute, which is what you should be able to see here in this graph. You can see on your left-hand side, this mannequin has a little bit bigger water space, right? For example, because there's less fat content in the body, less fat percentage. So basically, the body composition changes this lactate dilution space. And you might say, okay, well, what does it actually mean, or what does it do to me from a practical aspect? Okay, so let me give you an example, and I ask you to bear with me. It's going to get a little bit mathematically, but really very, very easy level. So let's assume we have an example athlete, and in our case, it might be a triathlete. Let's say this athlete is, for example, 70 kilograms. And let's assume we have a standard body composition, which is 15% fat, 40% muscle, 65% water, which is approximately the water and muscle that you would see with such a fat percentage. Then in our example here, our athlete is doing a cycling exercise, for example, right? Like, for example, right now in springtime, you test a triathlete on the bike ergometer, on the smart trainer, and you can assume that for such an athlete with such numbers, approximately 80 kilograms are involved in the cycling exercise. That means with that amount of water at 70 kilograms, with 65% water content, the lactate dilution space, so the amount of the body which can take up lactate, is approximately, according to the literature, 33 liters. Okay, just let's just sit for a moment, okay? Now we do exercise. We put the athlete on a bike ergometer, and we basically, apply a load, and the muscles start producing lactate, for example, in a normal incremental test for 5 minutes. And let's assume that during this exercise, because of the load we apply, 200 watts, 300 watts, whatsoever, let's assume that 1 kilogram of muscle accumulates 1.5 millimoles of lactate per minute. Then you can do easy math, and you can say, okay, 5 minutes of exercise multiplied by 1.5 millimoles per kilogram muscle, multiplied by 18 kilograms of muscle, this brings me to 132 millimoles of lactate. That might sound a little bit odd. Give me a second to explain. Now, if you dilute this 132 millimoles of lactate into the whole body, which is obviously what is happening, right? The lactate doesn't stay only in the working muscle. Then you need to divide this 132 millimoles by 33 liters of water. And then you arrive at a number which you can measure with your lactate meter, which is in this case 4.1 millimole. So Long story to derive, this is actually how you get those lactate concentrations that you measure in your device in this example 4.1, right? So the amount of lactate that is produced is obviously much, much more, and then it dilutes in several liters of body water, and this is how you get such a concentration. Now, let's assume this triathlete, let's assume maybe this, what we're looking at here now is from last year, November, so to speak. Now it's the mid of April. The athlete maybe, did spend some time in the gym during the winter time, did a lot of swimming exercise. And, long story short, the athlete bulked up in terms of added upper body muscle mass. But the athlete did maybe not do a lot of cycling training. So let's assume that in terms of cycling performance, the cycling muscles, the performance, the metabolic makeup, VO2 max, and so on, of the cycling muscles did not really change. Now, but maybe because of diet and gym and swim training and so on, let's assume the athlete gained a little bit of upper muscle mass and maybe lost some body fat and so forth. And therefore, now, because of lower body fat percentage, a little bit bigger muscle mass, and so on and so forth, now the dilution space is up by 3 liters, 36 liters. Again, nothing changed in this example, just to prove the point how body composition affects your lactate readings. Let's assume we do the same exercise now, and the muscles accumulate the same amount of lactate, because again, nothing really changed in this example in terms of the performance. So we get to the same mass here of 5 minutes, 18 kilograms of leg muscles producing 1.5 millimoles per minute, which again gives us obviously 132 millimoles of lactate. But now, those 132 millimoles of lactate dilute not in 33 liters, but in 36 liters, which means that the lactate concentrations that you measure is 3.7 millimoles, which means that your lactate curve would shift to the right, indicating, as we are going to talk about in a little bit later here today, indicating an improved performance, what most people would interpret as improved performance, because you see a lower lactate concentration. In fact, in this example, the performance of the leg muscles, the metabolic makeup, did not change. The only thing that changed, so to speak, is the size of the bathtub. So the size of the dilution space, the same amount of lactate was produced for metabolic reasons, but it was just diluted in a different size of a bathtub, so to speak. So that's something to take into account, at least to recognize that. Okay. And again, because the question came up here, just real quick, you're going to get the literature I'm using here in this presentation afterwards by email and some other references. This is why it also matters. What I'm showing you here is an example from constant load test, lactate concentration in constant load test. And what you see on the left-hand side is the lactate concentration, each line representing one subject in females. And on the right-hand side, you see lactate concentrations in the same study in males in the 30-minute constant load test. And why did I bring this up? Because, matter of fact, and I'm looking forward to get corrected on that, but thus far, I did not find one single study that validates lactate incremental tests specifically in women and female. So let me put this straight. If you're doing, for example, a fixed 4 millimoles threshold, which we're going to talk about later, and you do this in females, then you should be aware that such a concept is only validated, has been developed for males. And because females in general have a significant different body composition than men, different muscle mass, different water mass, different fat percentages, you should not be surprised to see significantly different lactate levels, okay? And that's something we are from inside take into account, and therefore I would like to create awareness for that, okay? So very important thing, one thing that you maybe have overlooked, and therefore I would, recommend to look into that. If you're doing conventional lactate testing, if you're testing with inside, then this is already baked into the algorithm, so accounted for. Next topic, device measurement error. That's another thing that's often overlooked. What I mean with that, when you measure a a lactate concentration at a certain power output, we normally look only at the measurement. So just to make up a number, we measure 2 millimoles at 200 watts, or 3 millimoles at, I don't know, 4 meters per second running speed, whatever is your sport, right? But what is often overlooked, that there's an error in the measurement. There's an error in the power measurement, indicated here by the horizontal bars. So the power at which you measured this lactate concentration might not be whatever 200 watts, but it might also be 195 or 205 or whatsoever, right? And the same obviously goes for the lactate. If you measure 2 millimoles in an incremental test, for example, then it might also be 1.9 or 2.1. And depending on your device, it might also be 2.3 or 1.7, right? So that is what I mean with device error. And it would be helpful, I feel, to take this into account. Let me give you an example. So what I did here is I created a normal lactate profile test. And the gray curve, so to speak, is a lactate profile without a device measurement error. Okay, and then the green curve represents the lactate curve as it would look like if this lactate measurement device, the Lactate Pro 2, which I show here, okay, would err on the lower end on what is known as the error. Let me explain what I mean with that. There are several validation studies which check the accuracy of different lactate meters, especially the handheld meters. I'm going to show you on the next slide, okay? And so it gives a range. There's a mathematical function that describes the error in terms of how many millimoles the measurement is off as a function of the measured value. So obviously at 1 millimole, the error is smaller in total millimole speaking than it is at 10 or 50 millimole, okay? So this is what you see here. So what you see here in this graph is, so to speak, one and the same test data, but then not only the gray lactate curve, which is what you would have measured maybe, but also the green and the red one, which is the scientific proven error of this device, okay, based on the peer-reviewed literature. So that means, for example, I used 4 millimoles. You can make the point, obviously, looking at 8 or 2 millimoles. But just to give you an idea, at 4 millimoles, the power output with assuming the error of the device errs to the lower end, so the device measures a little bit too low within the normal error, means that at 4 millimoles in this case, the power output would be 135 watts. If the error would err on the high end side of the device, what is within the normal error range, again, this is not outside the error range, it's within the normal error range, the power output at 4 millimoles would be 247, which is 12 watts difference, which is arguably, maybe already in the range where people would start to interpret such a delta, right? So most people would say, oh, there's, the curve shift 10 watts to the right. Well, it didn't. It's still within the error of measurement, right? And so this is what I wanted to create awareness for. Now, what we did in the past month, we researched all the literature we could find for all devices, not only lactate, also metabolic hearts, power meters, GPS watches, so on and so forth, and looked for the error function. So a mathematical equation which describes the error of these devices, okay? And we created, so to speak, this database of that and implemented it in our application. And again, as I mentioned, you can rewatch the webinar for sure to review that, but we will also send these references to you. So whatever device you're using, for example, if you use a Lactate Pro 2, for example, and you're interested in, oh, what is the error function of my device? And maybe is there a device which is better, for example, the Lactate Plus from Nova, which is more accurate, then you have the scientific references here, okay? So we are going to send this to you. What we did with that, why we did that, not because we were bored and wanted to read a little bit literature, what we basically did in order to solve this problem with the measurement error, when you are processing a lactate testing inside, incremental testing inside, we are actually running for, let's say, 5 steps. So per each step, it's 900. So with 5 steps, it's 4,500. We are running 4,500 different error scenarios. And then analyzing, we are able to analyze how accurate the result. So we are doing something like this. Let me explain real quick. This is the accuracy of the maximum lactate steady state. We do the same with VO2 max, but let's stick here to maximum lactate steady state. So you could argue anaerobic threshold if you wish. Okay. And so we plot the error of the speed or power measurement, depending on if it's running or cycling or swimming or rowing or whatsoever, on the x-axis. And we plot the error of the lactate measurement device on the y-axis. And then we can see basically what is the white line is telling you is if in between the normal error, so the 1 means 1 times the typical error from the literature, okay? If within that error which you get from the literature is the accuracy of your maximum lactate steady state that you will get as a result within the gold standard. So gold standard maximum lactate steady state, constant load test, the best you can ever get is 5 watts. I would almost argue the best you can get is 10 watts. Okay. So when within the typical error, which is the number 1 here, 1 times the typical error of your used devices, right? You are in the green zone, which means this is as accurate as it gets. And we do the same for VO2 max, right? So for example, VO2 max reliability is approximately 2 to 2.5 milliliters, sorry, per kilogram body weight. So if you upload the test, we apply the error of your device and check if the VO2 max result that you would be getting is still within the accuracy of a metabolic card. Okay, so that is about the error. Now let's get to the methodology problems or recommendations in terms of especially step duration and sport type. I address that because the duration of a step and therefore, so to speak, the testing protocol is, I would argue, and we have looked at a lot of incremental tests here, actually asked people to send incremental tests. It's actually, I think, one of the most overlooked issues in lactate testing. So let me explain. So what we're going to talk about and what I would try to get a common understanding on is that during an increment, during a step, the lactate concentration is, well, in some cases, it could just be stable, right? In some cases, you might have a load or running speed or power output at which the lactate concentration is not changing from rest. But it could be that the lactate concentration decreases during a step, right? Which is what most of you have seen, especially in fitter athletes, that at low intensity, the lactate concentration decreases. And of course, at some intensities, the lactate concentration will increase. And the kinetics, how it increases, you can see here. This is zoomed in, right, on the graph here. What you see? This is zoomed in, so to speak, in the calculations that we are doing. The dot here is the measured lactate, and the red line is the calculated lactate concentration within a step. In this case, it's 300 watt step. So you can see that the lactate concentration during this step, in this case, this was an 8-minute step, is increasing. And when you look at that, it should be relatively easy to understand if the increment would not be 8 minutes, but it would be prolonged. The line would continue growing to 10 minutes or 12 minutes because the step duration is not 8 minutes, but 10 or 12. Then the lactate concentration would be higher. And on the other hand, if the step would not be 8 minutes, but 5 minutes or 3 minutes, then the lactate concentration would be lower because obviously there's more time for the lactate to accumulate during this step. Okay, so this means obviously, and I hope you know that, and if not, I'm happy to make you aware of that, is that it is now very important to understand that the longer the step duration, right, the bigger the effect, so to speak, on your lactate concentration. Again, would be higher lactate concentration, but at the low intensities could also be a lower lactate concentration, right? Here's an example. Lactate curves with 5-minute step duration versus 3-minute step duration. Same athlete, same body composition, same, let's say, zero error of device accuracy, measurement error, all the same. Just because the step duration was shorter, the the lactate curves shift to the right or to the left, depending on what you want to look at here. Okay, so that obviously comes with a problem, and the problem is that therefore most tests are not really comparable. Right? If you work in a human performance lab and you do whatever 5-minute steps or 8-minute steps, and somebody walks into the door and has a test result with 3-minute steps in his hand or her hand, then that's pretty difficult to compare, right? Because you cannot easily, just say, oh yeah, if this would be whatever a few minutes longer or shorter, then it would look like that. Okay, so the comparability of that is actually, a problem. And here's one nice piece of literature which I wanted to include, which talks about that, because we are going to talk about the different concepts, the different concepts on how to interpret those lactate curves. Because there's different ones, OPLA or fixed 4 millimoles, there's, baseline plus 1.5, there's Dmax, modified Dmax, and so on and so forth, right? And all these methodologies that I'm going to show you have its right of existence, so to speak, right? But they are attached to a certain protocol. They are attached to a certain sport type, to a certain step duration, step size, and so on and so forth, right? And therefore, it is not good enough to just say, yeah, we are always just doing the same protocol, right? No, that's not good enough, because likely, well, let's put it this way. If the only thing you're looking for is to compare retest scenario if the curve shifted left or right, yes, then that is good enough. But if you want to use a lactate curve, for example, to prescribe training intensity zones, then you should know that whatever threshold you try to decipher from the lactate curve is hopefully as accurate as possible, but actually gives you a good shot at what the real threshold intensity would be. And the point I'm trying to make here with this graph is, if you apply the wrong threshold concept to the non-fitting or wrong protocol, then you get, you can obviously calculate a Dmax or 4 millimoles threshold or something, but if it's not fitted to the protocol, then what you present, what you give out to your clients, to your athletes, what you hand out as, so to speak, a threshold value is just not correct. Okay, so here's one example, and I'm going to give you a whole table. I just used 2 examples of a whole table which you're going to get. Okay, to compare, I would argue, the 2 most popular ways or 2 of the most popular ways how to interpret a lactate an incremental test. The top one is a classic, right? 4 millimole, fixed 4 millimole threshold. Many people, when I say, oh, if you can use 4 millimole, they are like, face palm and really, really think I'm joking. So what you see is 4 millimole fixed lactate concentration as an estimate of maximum lactate steady state, as a maximum, as the anaerobic threshold. This is always using gold standard 30-minute constant load test, right? Has an R-square value of 0.98 and a very small bias of just 0.12 meters per second in running. So what this tells you is that, and this is from 1976, that the 4 millimole threshold is actually pretty damn accurate. This is what this is showing you. In this study, using 2.4 meters per second as a starting speed, with an increment of 0.4 meters per second from one step to the other, with 5-minute step duration and 30 seconds rest in between to take the lactate. And what I didn't list here, 1% incline on, at this time, a Siemens treadmill, which was slightly cushioning to a little bit similar to what today would be a Woodway. Now, for this protocol, the 4 millimole threshold works very damn accurate if you want to have a grip on the MLSS value, on the maximum lactate steady state. However, if you apply the same 4 millimole concept to cycling, and you start with 100 watts, your increment is 40 watts, and you do a step duration of 8 minutes, then it's totally off, right? R square 0.71, which means like 30% of variability not explained, a big bias. And the same goes for Dmax methodology, right? You can use modified Dmax on a cycling test with 20 watts and 3 minutes, and you get reasonable accuracy, right? Very low R square 0.95 and 6 watts bias. But if you apply that to the same protocol as you apply your 4 millimole to, then it's actually not as good. It is just not as accurate, at least not in this population. And then we are going back to body composition and males and females. So again, you can get a whole table and the references where all this comes from. My point I'm trying to make here, you need to be aware of that. Because again, if it's not just, oh, we just always do the same protocol and compare left or right shift, which I'm going to address here in the next chapter. If you really want to do training zones, and say, hey, this is the zone you should do your interval training at because this is your threshold zones, then of course you need to know the threshold. You cannot just guess. And sorry, but 0.71, that's 30% variability. That's 30% off. Then it's, I don't need a lactate test at all. I can just use 220 heart rate minus age. Okay, and then it gets even more fuzzy. It gets even more fuzzy when you are doing protocols which do not use one of the published step size and step duration. For example, worst case scenario in terms of reproducibility or ability to apply, better to say, the ability to apply one of these scientific literatures is if you do, for example, a test in swimming or in this case here in running outdoors on the track, which is a great, don't get me wrong, we love it, we do it a lot, we do it with elite triathletes and so on and so forth, but it's very difficult if you want to apply a standard conventional threshold concept like Dmax or something, because what you can see is in this case, what you do is you keep the running distance or swimming distance or whatever you do constant, or if you do it on a bike, on a climb, then the climb distance is the same. And what happens, because the workload increases, the duration decreases. So now where are you with that, right? You're like, what do you do with that? Now you cannot even say, yeah, my step duration is 5 minutes, therefore I choose protocol 1, or this methodology or that methodology, or my step duration is 3 minutes, because it actually changes during the test. That makes it very, very difficult. So in most of these cases, because you might do whatever 1,600 meters or 1,200, depends on how fit your athlete is. Bottom line is, yeah, you get a lactate curve, but being certain that the threshold concept that you apply is actually correct, leaving alone females and body composition, good luck with that. Here's one thing, because I always get the feedback in the webinars, hey, I wanted to see more from actual use solution. I have a small video. I didn't want to go into the software, it takes too long. What I'm doing here, and apologies if it's maybe too small, I have 2 screens where we actually uploading lactate tests from the same athlete, same body composition, same everything. And on the right-hand side, you see a lactate test with 5-minute steps. On the left-hand side, you see a lactate test with 3-minute steps. Okay, and what you're going to see is that we are able to create a fitting to lactate curve for both cases. And in both cases, independent of the step duration, we get, maybe it's a little bit difficult to see here, we get the same results in terms of the same, for example, threshold value of 230 watts, independent of what the protocol is. I'm going to come back to that, okay? Because obviously, right, your threshold doesn't change, or the threshold of the athlete doesn't change just because you used, different step duration, right? It's just important that you use the correct evaluation method. Okay. Okay. How accurate is that? Well, again, you can read it more in the literature. This is an example of the accuracy of us detecting maximum lactate steady state using different kind of testing protocols. And this is somewhere of 0.95 to 0.98, I think was the best one. So the lowest variability that you can expect. Again, going to put this in there, but just so that you understand that it's not that I just, show you something how it works without telling you, oh, is that even accurate? Or is that even legit? Now I will have more stuff like that, about these things, addressing the accuracy and reliability. Because as you might have noticed by now, talking about error of devices, accuracy and reliability is something very important to us. So that brings us to the other question. The other big topic, so to speak, is the shift of the lactate curve, left to right, which I would argue is one of the more popular or most important things that people do with lactate testing, doing a test retest scenario application, where you want to use the comparison of a lactate test pre-training and post-training to understand if an athlete improved and maybe what happened in training, and to inform how the athlete should continue training for the next period of time. Okay. And this is something where I have a personal story, I have to say, because I, what was it now? 24 years ago, I was working in a university lab doing these tests, these incremental tests, and athletes, especially professional cyclists, would come back and say, hey, you know what, when you tell me the results look good, then I'm not necessarily racing good, and vice versa. Okay, so that triggered the interest. Of what does actually a left shift or right shift of the curve mean. And I'm going to start with asking my friend ChatGPT here and saying, hey, in general, because I use ChatGPT here just, to opening up on getting on the same level of understanding what in most cases is the understanding. Okay, so in most cases, if you would ask most people, what does it mean if the lactate profile curve, shifts to the right? What does it mean is that most people would interpret that as an improved and especially aerobic fitness. Okay, so this is the standard explanation, so to speak. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time to look a little bit deeper into that. So what this would mean, simplified speaking, is that the shift of the lactate curve to the right, which I'm showing here on the x-axis, and the aerobic fitness, the improvement in aerobic fitness, follows something like this positive relationship, meaning the further the curve shifts to the right, the bigger the improvement in aerobic fitness. That is, so to speak, what is the general interpretation. Now, let's look at what does the data and what does the science tell us. What I'm going to show you here is a graph of different sports of different athletes, elite athletes, young athletes, master athletes in terms of amateur athletes, so a whole mix, okay? And I'm going to show you on the x-axis the shift of the lactate curve. For cycling exercises, I'm going to show it related to 3 millimoles. And for running, I'm going to show it as a speed, running and swimming. I'm going to show it as a change in speed at the lactate concentration of 4 millimoles. So we are looking at the left and right shift of the curve. And then separate to that, there was the VO2 max measured with a metabolic card. And we compare the difference, so to speak, at power or speed at 3 and 4 millimoles to the difference in VO2 max. And this is what you get. Let me walk you through those graphs. So on the left-hand side, we are looking at cycling, a group of young cyclists, and what we are comparing is the difference in power output at 3 millimoles of each athlete. So one dot is each dot is one athlete, to the difference in VO2 max. And you can see there's almost really no correlation at all. Just as I mentioned, you know, as I mentioned, from my personal story in cycling, you know, not necessarily does a right shift or a left shift really mean an improved, and for in this case, aerobic capacity, which is arguable what VO2 max is. Now, the middle graph does the same in running. So change of speed at 4 millimoles of running speed, the dark green triangles is recreational master athletes in a treadmill running scenario, and the light green is professional triathletes on an outdoor scenario. You can see it's independent of the testing procedure. And here, yes, there is some kind of linear relationship, or you can see that in general there's a trend, right? There's a trend that people with a higher speed at 4 millimoles tend to have a higher VO2 max, but yeah, it's not really a good, a very accurate one. And then when we look into swimming, it's gone again, right? So into swimming, yeah, you could argue maybe because of the dots on the far right here, top right and bottom left, maybe there is a little bit, there is maybe a little bit of a trend, but not good enough. So long story short, the notion that a right shift of the lactate profile curve is a clear sign for an improved aerobic fitness, well, I would say this argument doesn't really stand, right? And we're going to disclose a little bit more in detail why that is, okay? Because there are so many other factors in play that you can basically say, yeah, there's a tendency that in many athletes, but not all, a shift to the right has a tendency to be a higher aerobic fitness, but precisely you don't know. Okay, here's another example. This is, again, real data, step test, 2 cyclists, same body weight, same VO2 max, measured with a metabolic card in a REM test. Athlete 1, black curve, athlete 2, the gray curve. Okay, you can see a clear shift of the lactate curve to the right, even though those guys have the same VO2 max, right? So what is the difference? The difference in both guys is their anaerobic capacity. You can measure it in something like a VLA max. The black one has a VLA max of 0.85, so maximum ability to produce energy in the glycolytic system, and therefore at the same body weight, sprints with almost 1100 watts. And the gray one, who has the right shifted curve, same body weight, same VO2 max, has a much lower sprint performance and therefore has a shift to the right. So here's another player, right? Here's another player of another metric which influences the position, so to speak, or what causes a shift in the lactate curve. So basically, so simplified speaking, the higher, and we're going to come back to that in a second, the higher the aerobic capacity of an athlete, the more the curve tends to shift to the right. But this could be canceled or even done in the other direction by, a higher anaerobic capacity, a higher glycolytic capacity, right? So more lactate production, more anaerobic capacity, if you just have seen in the two athletes here, shifts the curve to the left. Okay, and again, I'm going to show you a video, from the application, how you can prove this. So to start with, you see here a lactate curve, 5-minute step duration, rest in normal lactate curve, and what the software could do with that. So here on the right-hand side, this is our lactate curve. And now what we're going to do, we are going to basically create a copy of that data set. Okay, and you can see the VO2 max originally, the VO2 max was 54.6, and now we are just going to artificially change it to a VO2 max of 60 and going to rerun the test. And now we are recalculating the lactate concentration, the lactate curve. And before, as you will remember, there was a great fit, right? The dots, the measured lactate concentration were sitting perfectly on the line. And now you can see that we basically have this right shift of the lactate curve, right? So to go back, this was the original curve. All the dots, all the measured data are sitting or lying on the curve. And when we improve, nothing else changes. VLMX is not changing. Everything is the same, right? The curve shifts to the right. We do have a lower lactate concentration for the same power output because we have a improved VO2 max. So why is that? Let us explain. Let us dive deeper. What is the physiology behind that? Why is that actually happening? So there's two important understandings which I would like to bring up first to have a level ground here of understanding within the group. And the one is that lactate is obviously produced in the glycolysis. What some people still, no offense to anyone here today, what some people still think that lactate is only produced, at high intensities or when there's a lack of oxygen or I don't know what. Matter of fact is, lactate is produced always in glycolysis. And it is not pyruvate, which is a primary product of glycolysis. It is actually lactate. So to speak, if you take 100 glucose molecules and you put them into the glycolysis, then you get approximately 196 or 198 lactate molecules. So more or less, there's a proportional relationship between lactate that is produced in the glycolysis and how much glucose is used for that. Okay. And the other aspect I would like you to understand is that the clearance of lactate, the combustion of lactate, the oxidation of lactate is a function or is related to your oxygen uptake, which should be pretty clear because think about it, if, as far as we know, if we want to oxidize anything in this universe, then we need oxygen for it. This is where the name oxidization comes from. So obviously, the more oxygen we have, the more we can oxidize. This is why, you have superchargers in the car. Just to have more oxygen, you can burn more fuel, produce more power. Okay, and therefore, it should not come as a surprise that the combustion of lactate, the clearance of lactate, the oxidation of lactate is related to oxygen uptake. And the lactate concentration that you can actually measure is the result of both of that. The lactate concentration that you measure is actually the production. I left out here, so to speak, the dilution, which I explained in the beginning, so related to the body composition. But the lactate concentration that you measure is actually the result of how much lactate was produced in the glycolysis and how much has been combusted in the aerobic metabolism. And once you understand that, or once that is clear to everyone, then we can dive a little bit deeper into that. And we can look at what's actually happening during a conventional incremental test. So you have seen this graph before, where we have the measured lactate concentration as dots. We have the workload and these gray bars, which you can see here. And then we have the calculated lactate concentration in red. But now what is new on this graph is we're actually showing you the combustion rate of lactate in purple and the actually production rate of lactate in blue. And so what I'm trying to tell you is that the lactate concentration that you measure is the result of these two variables. And both can change somewhat independently, right? So you can have someone with a high oxygen uptake and therefore being able to clear more lactate, or you can have an athlete who's producing less. Both would result in a lower lactate concentration. You can also have an increased lactate concentration, or so to speak, a left shift of the curve, which could be a result of, as we discussed a little bit, just more lactate production or less combustion. And what we are actually doing, we are deciphering that. And when we do that, you can go a level deeper. You can go to the next level. So what I mean with that, the lactate combustion that you see here, as mentioned, right, going back one more, the lactate oxidation, lactate combustion is related to the oxygen uptake. So that means when we are able to calculate the lactate combustion rate, we can also calculate and decipher what is the actual oxygen uptake. And this is what you do see in this graph. So in this graph, in this case, it's a running exercise. You can see in blue the calculated oxygen uptake, and the blue dots is the measured oxygen uptake. There's no fitting or nothing. It's just plotting the raw data into the same graph. Okay, so that is actually possible. It is actually possible to calculate oxygen uptake the same way as you would get it from measured lactate as you would get it from a metabolic cart. And then a whole new world opens up to that. What do I mean with that? So let me repeat. We take the lactate concentration and we're able to decipher lactate production and lactate clearance. We're able to decipher those two factors that create the lactate concentration that you measure. And then from there, many other things open up. Let me explain. For example, the lactate production, as explained, is proportional to glucose breakdown. So once you know how much lactate is produced, you know how much glucose has been utilized. And if you now know the total workload and you know the oxygen uptake, and you know how much is coming from glucose, then of course you can get the fat oxidation rate. So what I'm telling you here is that you can get a measurement like fat oxidation. You know where you have the fat oxidation is, so to speak, the remaining energy that is not coming from glucose levels, right? And of course, you can get something like threshold and maximum lactate steady state, right? And of course, when we can calculate the oxygen uptake, we can also calculate the VO2 max, again, only from lactate, okay? Even though Luca might disagree and say, oh, you can't do that. No, let me show you. We can, and if you're not happy with that, you can contact us for sure, right? And dive deeper. But I'm going to show you how accurate it is and that we actually can do that. Here's what this then looks like before I jump to the validation, right? Before I jump to the validation, let me show you how this looks like in the whole process. So I cut a few steps because it's very similar to what you've seen already before. We basically upload a lactate test here, and then after this is processed, we get what I just described. We get all those data points like the VO2 max, the VLA max, the threshold values, the fat max. Coming to the point of Luca, we also get the available glycogen, which is estimated from the body composition and all the other metrics. And then we can use that to get a full, so to speak, plot of the kinetics, right? The kinetics of carbohydrate combustion or fat combustion. You can see on the left-hand side here the actual production and oxidation. You can get the aerobic and anaerobic share and so on and so forth, right? So that is an example, okay, what you get, so to speak, at the first place. And then, of course, for those of you who are working in actually applying that in training, you can then use this information, for example, to create training zones and create a training zone where you can see here exactly how much fat is burned or how much carbohydrate is burned at a certain intensity or at a certain training zone. Okay. So this is an example, this is an overview, and now I'm jumping to show you a little bit how good or how accurate or not accurate that is. And by the way, Luca, I'm going to look at your email afterwards and send you an email tonight, okay? So how does that look like in terms of the validity and accuracy? I'm going to give you a sneak peek into some of the data that we have and some of the data that in a similar way are going to get published soon. I've shown you already some stuff that has been published already. So to start with, this is the recalculation of the lactate concentration. So this is from a bunch of step tests. For each step, the measured lactate, in this case, it was with a Biosen device, so with a lab tabletop device, on the x-axis, and then the recalculation of that lactate concentration on the y-axis. So you say, okay, well, this is basically what you do, guys. So of course you have a pretty good correlation with that. You know, I can also do a spline function or some kind of fitting function, and I might get a similar curve. But as I mentioned, we also do that to calculate oxygen uptake. And this is what you see on the right-hand side here. So on the right-hand side, you see the calculated oxygen uptake, and this is in treadmill running. So again, we're using different protocols, doesn't matter. I try to prove the point that a protocol, you know, we are beyond caring about what protocol you use. You can use any protocol you want, basically, nowadays. So this is measured oxygen uptake with a metabolic cart, 5-minute steps. The first 3 minutes were not used, so just averaged the last 2 minutes. And then we calculate the kinetics of the VO2, including something like slope component and so on and so forth, and also average the last 2 minutes of the calculated one. And you can see it matches pretty good, which is especially great for running because you also have things like running economy involved and so on and so forth. Swimming, it looks similar. However, in swimming, there is a slight difference here in swimming. The differences you get in the energy demand because of the swimming economy, so to speak, the techniques, the position in the water, but also the body size. The influence of that is much bigger because of the density of the water. So in swimming, we recommend using a VO2 analyzer additionally, but there should be a study coming out soon which looks at swimming tests from both triathletes and elite swimmers, where this is disclosed. Unfortunately, I don't have it in here today, but again, just contact us and we can share a little bit more. I just don't have it in here today. So going further, therefore, how accurate can we get VO2 max with that? This is now again different here. This is cycling again, 8-minute step duration indoor. And this is for the same plot that we've seen before with the VO2 data. This is the correlation of the VO2 max. And just to be clear, this is not the peak VO2 in a 5-minute step test. We used the 5-minute step test to calculate, but the measured VO2 max was in a ramp where speed was increased every 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, by 0.2 meters per second. Okay. So with that, I hope I could have shown you that we take accuracy and validity seriously. And I hope I could have shown you a little bit what to look for when you do your own lactate testing, and what is out there, what can be done better maybe. So let me summarize a little bit. Why is that even possible? Why is it even possible to get VO2 and glucose and all this stuff? Because we are lucky, so to speak, and you are lucky as well because you do lactate testing. Lactate is really at this pivotal point where it connects glycolysis and aerobic metabolism. And this is really fortunate because therefore, as I showed you, once we are able to decipher the actual lactate combustion and production from the concentration, we are opening up this whole new world um, of using new metrics. Okay, um, which is like, for example, VO2 max and substrate utilization, maybe one of the most important ones. Johan, I'm coming to your question in a second because we go to Q&A anyway. As a follow-up, as I mentioned, I'm happy to share all the literature that we used here with you. So especially the literature on the different testing protocols and what I disclosed here for lactate in glycolysis and lactate oxidation and so on and so forth. You can get all of that. And if you want to understand, like Johan asked here, hey, what can I do with my protocol? Can I use my protocol? If you want to dive deeper into that or express your concerns, like some people here, or want to know more, or how does it work in swimming, or so on and so forth, then I would recommend, I would ask you, I would invite you to use the QR code here to book a meeting with us to discuss. And then we can take it a step further and really go into the individual discussions for your individual use case. If you don't want to do that, you say, no, let me first check the literature, that's also fine. But again, I hope that I was able to give you an overview of what we're doing, why you can do more with lactate than just a lactate profile curve. And if you still just want to do a lactate profile curve, like we did since 50 years, then please use the literature to hopefully bring your lactate testing to the next level in terms of looking at body composition and looking at error of the devices, and especially looking at protocols and how to interpret the lactate curve. Because as I hope I was able to tell you or to explain, interpreting a left and right shift of the lactate curve is not straightforward and not something that is that you can just say or pinpoint to like aerobic improvement. And with that, I looking forward to more questions. Feel free, put any question out there, please. A question that you might have, somebody else might have the same question, or it might trigger a question for somebody else. I'm going to start replying to those questions right here now. So Johan is asking if you can do a REM test without lactate. For what I've shown you here, no. Everything I've shown you here is with the use of lactate. But we are working on a sub-maximum protocol for lactate. This might be interesting, especially for cardiologists. 1 minute in theory should be possible. However, before, so to speak, we would need to, before we open it or tell you, yes, Johan, you can do that, we would need to run some internal validation. Nothing that we put out there goes out without being validated. Our users know that whatever we restrict protocols or whatever, if we don't have the proof that it lives up to gold standards. So in your case, I would invite you, ask you to maybe book a quick personal consultation so we can look at that if that is of interest. But it would need to go with lactate measurement. So Torsten is asking, what are the benefits of using lactate compared to remote testing only? Yes, there is a slight improvement in accuracy, especially when it comes to VO2 max. It's approximately 1.5% better in terms of the correlation. That might change in the future as we are going to work on improvements of the PPT technology as well. But at this moment, the lactate testing, especially the new algorithm, is a little bit more accurate than the PPT. I love the question from Mathieu here about beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate. Awesome question. The effect at the low lactate concentration, Mathieu, is relatively small. the effect at higher lactate concentration, especially at all-out efforts, is quite big or can be quite significant. We recently published a paper on reliability of measuring buffering capacity in the blood, and we are going to have a follow-up paper on that addresses this. So yes, we have some data on that, and I can tell you this is highly relevant there, above lactate concentration, roughly 5, 6, 7 millimoles. Slides, Alessandro, I'm unfortunately not able to give you the slides, but we are going to share the literature that I use with this. Okay. Michael, I'm not sure if I understand your question. Do you think in swimming the breakdown of technique, DPS, I don't know what DPS is honestly, in a step test correlates with lactate so-called threshold? Maybe you can explain further, or we can hop on a call. VT1 and VT2 intensities is not the same as LT1 and LT2. To answer that question, there's a whole lot of discussion going on. Our research manager actually did his PhD comparing ventilatory and lactate thresholds, so it's not exactly the same, no. Great question from Daniel. How can the software account for the day-to-day variability in lactate, which can be quite significant for the same given workload and other physical parameters? Do you need to perform repeat testing to generate confidence interval? No. What we do have people especially in elite sports, who spread out the test over several days because they do it in training camps in the field. They get a little bit more noise because of the day-to-day variability, but in general, it's not a problem. Why do I say it's not a problem? As I mentioned, we already take approximately 4,500 different area scenarios into account. And mathematically, it would not really matter if the error that we take into account is day-to-day variability, or if the error that we take into account comes from the device, right? If you just apply an error, it doesn't really matter where the error comes from. Why also do I think it's not making a difference? Because the validation papers, the validation data that I've shown, you have day-to-day variability baked in there. What do I mean with that? The lactate test is performed on day 1, and for example, a VO2 max test is performed on day 2 or 3 or 4. In one of the papers I've shown here, I've actually 2 VO2 max tests, where the reliability of 2 VO2 max tests was, so to speak, looked at the same study. And what we see is that the retest reliability is bigger on the same level as the difference between, for example, calculated VO2 max and VO2 max measured by lab cards. That's exactly how it's written in the paper. So therefore, yes, there is day-to-day variability, but because we have several data points and because we take the error into account, it doesn't seem to make a significant difference here. Let me keep reading questions here because there are some longer ones. Yeah, Henrik, thanks for the feedback. Looking forward. If you have more questions, please reach out. Ralph asked, okay, VO2 max seems quite accurate. In your test, you calculate the VLI max from a 20-second sprint, which you feel is quite sketchy. How accurate is it, and how much influence tapering before the test? So that's different. The 20-second test is only done in the PPD. We don't recommend doing sprint test at all, doing lactate test. Okay. To be clear on that, my thesis in my master's in 2003 was developing a 15-second sprint test. At this time, the first sprint test to do VLMX using lactate. And there are a lot of shortcomings. There was actually a webinar about it and so on and so forth. So we don't really do this. The 20-second test is not really sketchy. It is actually, I would argue, the better way than to do a 15-second sprint test with lactate, because what is doing, it takes every second of power or speed recording and calculates the VLMX during this test. And then it actually tries, this is why it's 20 seconds. It's a little bit too long, so to speak, right? Then it's obviously 5 seconds longer than 15 seconds. And then it looks for a decrease, so to speak, in the VLMX, because this should happen after approximately 15, 16, 17 seconds to be sure that you really reach VLMX in this test. Christopher, in the step duration, equally important at low intensity, below fat mass and high intensity. No, so for us, using our technology, the step duration does not matter. The latest version of the algorithm uses any step duration, is validated for any step duration between 2 and 12 minutes, showing the same accuracy with the new version without, within that range. Dehydration, Matt, welcome. Excellent question. Not a huge thing because dehydration, yeah, you can use a liter of water. That goes back to my body composition thing. It will alter your lactate reading maybe by 0.1 millimole. And then you need to argue that this is within the error of measurement of your device anyway. Scott is asking about the thoughts on Jan's protocol. No. Well, yes, a lot of thoughts. I feel like it is going too much into the detail here. Let me put it this way. Jan is doing a great job. He has a tons of experience with what he's doing. And he has been super successful with what he's doing. Obviously, I'm biased, so you will take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, obviously, but I know from what's under the hood in terms of science, in terms of mass, in terms of computing power, that what we are doing is, and that's no offense, it's, sorry, I cannot say it in a more delicate way, is technology more advanced. We work very successfully. If you might have seen Scott with swimmers recently, one of the swimmers who works with Insight for a long time broke the long-standing 400-meter freestyle world record. There's a lot of success with the swimming teams we work with, and a lot of us come to us working with Jan before. And again, we cannot substitute the experience and the advice, but I'm confident to say that from a technology perspective, how accurate is what we are doing, also taking into account swimming technique, which Jan is not, which makes a huge influence on his accuracy of his result. I'm confident to say that we are much better here and much more advanced, which is no offense. It's just, Jan is by himself. We have mathematicians, we have engineers, we have physicians, we have, it's just different manpower behind it. Ed, welcome. How important is it in incremental test to consider time gap between the steps and take the lactate sample? Not so much, really. We played around with that a little bit, and the protocol can account for that. You've seen this kinetics, right, where we calculate lactate as a kinetic, and so it can be taken into account. It's not a huge thing. Let's put it this way, if it's longer than 30 seconds because you're still practicing, so to speak, to take lactate samples, then flag it to our support team. But if it's less than 30 seconds, in most cases, not a big difference because the delta that you would get, again, is within the error of the device, and this is taken into account. Kurt, software price, I'm not talking prices here, but happy to connect you to somebody from support to discuss prices ranges with your application, like how many tests, how many athletes you're doing, what kind of features you want. You have an e-learning hub, you want access to that. So that's not a straightforward price, but if you're interested, I would be very happy to find a solution for that. And also, if you, by the way, if you book an appointment to check this out, we give you free tests, we give you free advice, so free consultation, and we give you free additional assessments using the software on top of what you pay for, no matter what tier you sign up for. Recording, yes. Recording is available until the weekend. Michael, distance per stroke. So coming back to your question, I don't think so. We have a little bit of data of stroke distance and stuff, but I don't think it corresponds well enough. We would need to crawl the database or the literature to find out. In general, we really, we can do swim testing without, and there's some without VO2, and we have swimming federations who do it without, but there is a benefit to do it with. Our software works with both. Thorsten, experience with female athletes during the cycle, menstrual cycle. My honest answer is no, Thorsten. I don't. I mean, I have a little bit from my own coaching, but not enough that I would be happy to give you an answer. So Mathieu, I think question is answered. Adding to Daniel's point, is there any consideration of variety on conditions? Again, temperature, humidity, surface. Great. Yes, Dan. So you can store this information in our app. We don't have a fixed, so to speak, algorithm that says, yeah, because it was warmer, your lactate should be higher or lower, because we don't feel there's a good enough science out there to have a general mathematical equation that does that, because it depends on heat adaptation and stuff like that. The general guideline is test in the conditions you want to use the data in. So if the athlete is training or racing in high temperature and humidity, for example, then yes, this should be taken into account. Surface in running can be taken into account. Yes, we can do that because this is not so much linked to the personal adaptation of the athlete. Yasmin, correlation between LT2 levels and FTP in cycling. Yes, there's some correlation, but not so good. I think an R square of maybe 0.8 or something. Not super great, I would argue. Oh gosh, there's a lot of questions today. Cool. For standard lactate testing protocol, is there any range you want to hit? Yes. So there is the current, or you could argue almost old protocol, which asks you to do 6-minute steps and a minimum lactate concentration of 2.5. With the new algorithm, this is gone. With the new algorithm, you can do any protocol, incremental protocol, starting with a concentration of 0.5 whatsoever. It's actually recommended to do that. That means that the test is getting much, much shorter, right? The new testing protocol will allow you to do a full test in 20 minutes only. We already tested that, and we did several tests in that time range. Romans. Roman, great questions. You did lactate testing in 16 times 15 meter interval swimming, and you saw lactate production rate dropping from interval to interval. I assume you mean maybe not only production rate. I'm not sure. Maybe you mean lactate concentration, so I don't know what. But you try to understand why that is. Can we model that behavior? Yes, we can. We can model, we can calculate lactate behavior during interval sessions. I would argue relatively precisely. So yeah, please reach out, Roman. You have the QR code here. You can book a consultation, and we can dive into that. Paul, can one perform a lactate test using just Insight only, or does one must have also lactate analyzer? So what I presented today was about using lactate analyzers. We do have the so-called PPD technology, which allows for remote testing, which allows you to do testing without lactate. So if you're interested in that, Paul, then similar thing, please use the QR code, and you can take it from there. Pete, which step test do I recommend for cycling? The blunt answer, Pete, would be I don't care anymore. With the new lactate algorithm, you can do whatever you want. I would, if you would ask me, I would think 3 minutes, because then the test can be done in 15 minutes, you are done. Maybe 18 minutes or 20 minutes. Gerd, thanks for the feedback. Michael, yes, he did, both lactate and VO2. Matt, do we need all of the body cam adjustments validity? No, just the primary one is fine. Thanks for the feedback, Bev. That's great. No, so you just need body fat, Matt. And if you don't have if you don't have yet this scale, there's this one bioimpedance scale which we which we deployed also to several federations. That's also answering the next question here. What is a body composition analyzer we can use if DEXA is not accessible? So we do have a meta-analysis on body composition analyzers, and there's one smart scale, one bioimpedance scale, which over here in Europe costs 230 bucks on Amazon, which we have deployed to several Olympic federations, and they compared the data to like DEXA scan and BotPod, and it always comes back great. And that's what we would recommend. Again, it comes out from a scientific meta-analysis of accuracy of different methodologies. Michael, use Insight without lactate testing. Yes, in the PPD you can do it without lactate testing. Oh, now it's rapid fire here, huh? Matt, I'm not sure. I lost you here on the PPD. Maybe you can reach out to the help center for that. God, guys, let me kind of read this fast. Can you see the difference in lactate production accumulation when putting it inside? Yes, you can. Dana, I don't have the link here with me to the Amazon one, but if you reach out, we can provide you with that. Great question from Bogue. If you do outside lactate testing on a mountain with 3 or 6 minutes protocol, how do you account for that? Again, you can do whatever you want. You just need to put in the duration of the effort and the rest period of the effort into the software, and it will account for that. So it doesn't matter if your rest period was 30 seconds or 30 minutes, you can just put it in there and it will take into account, it will work. We have validations on all kinds of testing protocols, and you don't even need the same on period. So you can have 3 minutes 30, 4 minutes 15, 5 minutes 37, I don't know what, and all mix it up. Falk, yeah, new algorithm is already on live. We're testing with beta testers. Just some graphical glitches. Validation is done. Should be a question of weeks, but we can already send you the new Excel spreadsheet and you can test it out. So please reach out to support. Philip, beginners? No, not really. Not really any things for beginners versus not beginners. I would only argue for the beginners to use the to use the lactate protocol. I think it's much easier. Yeah. So Romans, yes, this is exactly what I was thinking. That you see increased lactate concentrations, but the delta from one step to the other goes down. This is because you might have seen that in one of my slides here already. If you go back here, you can see lactate production in the last step. You can see it's decreasing during the step. This is because of the drop in pH and therefore the inhibition of glycolysis. The algorithm takes all of that into account. So yes, we can model that. Guys, I'm very sorry, but I need to leave. There's so many great questions, but it's no fake. I really have to go for family reasons. I need to pick up my daughter actually. So if there's any more questions, I really love those questions. Okay, for users, we do have the Ask Me Anything sessions. We are going to announce the next one. Go there. Reach out to us via the help desk, and for everybody else who's not users, you can have our contact details at least in here in this QR code, and we're happy to hear from you and reach out. And I need to remember to contact Lucas here. Happy Easter. Thanks again, everyone, and looking forward to get in touch with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.